Welcome to YogiViews, where my guest is yoga itself, through interviewing those who practice it, teach it, sell it, or simply love it. I am Antonio Saucis. Most people have heard the phrase, yoga is the integration of mind, body, and spirit, what clearly refers to the fact that yoga includes psychological aspects in its practice. But what are those aspects? How do these two sciences relate to each other? And most importantly, how can yoga aid the treatment of some very common psychological issues, such as, for example, trauma? I invited today Darcy Lyon to discuss this intriguing topic. Welcome, Darcy.
Thank you so much. Good to be here.
Darcy Lyon is a certified Anusara Yoga teacher and has a master's degree in Expressive Arts Therapy from CIIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies. She sees private clients, teaches public classes, workshops, and trainings bridging Eastern and Western understanding about psychological change and integrative wisdom. Her diverse background includes a history in dance, master's in clinical psychology, and 2 decades of study in mindfulness-based practice and spirituality, practicing also at women's shelters, retreats, and eating disorder clinics. Darcy, what was your first experience with yoga? When did you meet, or how did you meet yoga for the first time?
Yeah, I met yoga when I was 18, so I took a year off between high school and college, and I was home, and there was a lot of family difficulty at that time. And I went to a yoga class actually with my mother. And I remember just being fascinated. I'd been a gymnast, and I was like, what is this? It's like gymnastics, but it's not. And I was immediately intrigued. And then I went away from yoga for a long time and rediscovered it after years in dance and just fell in love with it again for its intelligence and the way it works with the body.
Mm. And so you had a little bit of a physical first in, but then when did the spiritual aspects come?
Right. You know, it's almost like that comes as you deepen your practice inherently. So I would say as I started to practice in my second time, late 20s, early 30s, then I just started to get the sense of the energy movement and the way it connected me with something larger, with the force of nature, the way that the seasons turn, sort of that cycle of change that happens, connecting with the life force itself inside of me. Yeah, I think that just happened through the practice, the way it does for so many of us.
Yes, it does. We say that asana is an entryway into yoga.
It's like the gateway drug into the deepening.
Exactly. And when did your interest for mental health start? Well,
my mother's a psychotherapist, so I was around it a lot. And then I think I've always been fascinated by people's stories and how they make sense of their lives. So at first that was in theater, and then in my own life journey, just how people journey, how people make sense of stories, how they grow, how they develop. I started very early on using the expressive arts. I had a brother who had cancer, and I wrote a performance about it, and I noticed how psychologically that helped me to process it and make sense of it. So I think it was through that experience very early on as well, and it's just stayed throughout my life, where I'm really interested in psychological growth and development and how we can deepen our connection to our own soul's journey.
But you now mix it with yoga. So
Yes.
How did that mix come about in you?
Well, it happened really almost by accident, in the way that we can look back and say, oh, I see how everything connects now. So I went to CIIS, and while I was studying their human development and theory and attachment, things that I would study, I would say, oh, this is the Yoga Sutras, or this is asana, or this is what I've already learned in the Eightfold Practice. So I started to, I'm really grateful to CIIS because they would let me write my papers and bridge what I was learning about development with yogic understandings. And so my understanding started to synthesize through that, through getting my master's and bringing these two together and seeing how they complement each other and where they're different as well.
Well, I'm sure you'll get an opportunity of tell us these places where it meets and these other places where it doesn't. But not everybody knows what expressive arts
Right.
is. So what is it?
Right. So expressive arts would be using alternate modalities other than talking to share that which can't necessarily be shared in words. So for example, I'm working with someone and they're trying to decide, do I move to this place? Do I take this job? And we draw a picture. Well, let's draw a picture of what does that look like? Or what is that feeling in you? Or what would that outcome be? And then the person could stand there, say, and feel in their body. So expressive arts integrates a visual aspect with maybe a somatic or a felt sense. It might include music. Can you find a song to express that? What's a sound you could make? It might include drama elements. Let's sculpt that problem, or let's sculpt that dynamic in your family. So it's a way of bringing in more creative thinking, more of our right brain to tell the story of what it is we're struggling with, when words might really limit us or not fully speak to the experience.
Well, but also a lot of conflicts in us are generated or established prior to the language or
Yes.
prior to our ability, and we still thought back then
Right.
just with images.
Right.
So would you say that this is a way of perhaps digging deeper in time?
Absolutely, because yeah, the infant doesn't have words. And as children in general, image is a much more powerful way to express something, a much more direct source than words. Words really limit the full articulation of the soul's experience or the felt experience. So yeah, images take us back to time. We can express things in our infancy or even pre-birth, where it's not necessarily known cognitively, but it speaks to something deeper. It calls out that experience in ourselves through creating the image or the collage or the drawing.
And do you in expressive arts then go back to trying to put words to the experience or not?
It depends.
It
It
depends.
depends on the experience. Some experiences you want to just let the image be there and the image reflect back, and there's just this direct witnessing or moment of holy recognition where we see this image speaks to us in a very powerful way. So sometimes no. Sometimes it might be useful to try and then articulate what is happening in that experience to bridge again the both sides of the brain and to start to bring forth that understanding in our body into cognitive awareness.
I'm also thinking from the yoga standpoint, because for yoga, speech is very important.
Right.
You got to be very careful of how you name your reality and how you speak
Right.
about yourself. So it's an interesting way of addressing both, and the need
Right.
for no words,
Right.
and then perhaps the respect for words as well. So
Right.
this is why I was asking.
Right, to recognize the power of words and how to use words. And also, in first understanding things, to let it be messy, because we have to be messy in order to find that vach, that's power of speech, right? That you have to sort of stumble with your words before you can really claim the potency of language that it has, and certain words have to carry us.
Yeah. So you were talking about the mix, or the way they complement each other, the way they. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I like to think of this through the lens of the koshas, and since the audience might not know that, then so we have these layers of ourself, and the first one, the physical body, the Annamaya kosha. In that arena, that's where yoga is a particularly strong conversation. Asana is a powerful way that people come to yoga now. Somatic therapy is still relatively new in the psychotherapy canon. So use of the body is not as evolved, although it's growing more so in Western psychology. Same pranamaya kosha, our energy body. Yoga has all of this awareness of the breath and of energy and how to work with it. And I would say that's newer in our Western psychological models. So those are really complex conversations that I think yoga has these unique tools and gifts and jewels that we in Western psychology could bring in and could be supported by. Then in Manomaya and Vishnumaya kosha, our core feelings, our core affect, our story, our sense of the world, then yoga doesn't have as complex a conversation. We have the states of mind, or the aspects of mind, manas, buddhi, and ahankara. We have the gunas, rajas, tamas, sattva. But those aren't accessed as much for most people, I find. Versus in Western psychology, we have personality theory, we have the DSM that looks at patterns held in the body and in our personality structure. We have attachment, we have psychodynamic theory. There's so much, but that's where Western psychology, I think, has a more refined conversation. And then finally, Anandamaya Kosha. I mean, both streams are trying to get to this place. What is essential nature? What is the essential self that Jung would talk about? Both streams are trying to take us back to that source that is never affected by any of our outer experiences. And what's so exciting about this field is that the two can weave together to more powerfully take us to that source when used in complements.
That's very interesting. Do people take this mix gladly? Yeah, do they accept it? Or?
Well, I'm giving you my theory. So I don't necessarily always articulate to everyone, this is the theory that I work from. And that, yeah, we can work. There's a workshop I do where I blend together the yoga and psychology, and we use this lens, this model. And yeah, it's very powerful for people. And this is the developing conversation in our field. This is my way of looking at it. It's not necessarily the only way.
Yeah, perfect. But because we work with people, we have to know. But I'm sure, in my personal practice, I have also noticed that when you involve the body,
right,
people are usually perhaps a little bit more uncomfortable at the beginning, but more engaged.
Exactly.
Yeah, after all, they're more engaged. Now, trauma is a big issue, and there's a place where I believe that trauma has been around forever, but now we have a name for it, and we know a neuronal path, and we talk about it. So tell us a bit about trauma first.
Right. So I'm going to go by the definition of trauma that's in the DSM, because the body processes those experiences differently than you might have a breakup, a heartbreak that's really hard and painful, and we say, oh, that was traumatizing, but it's not a trauma. And so a trauma is any experience that has actual or threatened physical harm to ourself or someone close to us, that it threatens our integrity or our emotional safety or even our life. So a car accident, a mugging, of course abuse of any kind, but it also includes witnessing the same in another. Watching a mugging, seeing a car accident, those are traumatizing as well, because we witness someone else hurting, someone dying in the hospital.
Oh, so what you're saying is not necessarily maybe we did not have that experience, but by witnessing we can be traumatized as well.
As well, yeah. Yeah, so that's the definition of trauma, and the body digests it, the mind digests it differently than normal memory. That normal memory is stored sequentially, it's stored in the neocortex and the limbic system and the reptilian brain. They all work together in a harmony, versus traumatic experiences are stored more in fragments, in images that have really laden emotional content and that do not have a through line or a storyline. So if you have a trauma, you can't tell the complete story of it. And usually image is split off from affect. This is where the weaving together image becomes so important.
So important.
And even just remembering trauma. So in a study, veterans who remembered a traumatic experience, the part of their brain responsible for language shuts down, but the part of their brain responsible for image or feeling highlights and sort of gets overdrive.
This is perhaps why a lot of people can't find words to describe their feelings or their images or what's coming to them.
Right, because in the moment of the trauma, in the moment of the car coming at you or the earthquake, if we go to language and use our neocortex, long ago the dinosaur would have eaten you. That's what it's from. So the neocortex shuts off and the limbic system highlights, and we go straight into fight, flight, freeze response, and that keeps us safe. That's the brilliance of the mind. You know, so people get into this, well, why didn't I run when he pulled out the knife? Or why didn't I do this? Well, you don't have a choice. The decision mind turns down, and if you are here to tell us what you did, you were successful. Because that's the goal. The goal is to survive.
Yes. Now, trauma involves a very highlighted reactivity in the body.
Right.
Tell us a bit about that relationship. How is it that the body seems to sometimes, when evoking a traumatic experience, goes into a reaction that is not necessarily related to the reality that the person is witnessing now, but to the original?
Exactly. So to the limbic brain, all time in the reptilian brain, all time is right now. So if Dad walked down the hallway and stepped on the creaky floorboard right before he came in and yelled at you, you might be in your own house and there's a creaky floorboard. The body responds as though it is 25, 35 years ago, and that's happening. So the limbic brain, the reptilian brain, doesn't recognize time difference. Because trauma is stored in this unique way where there's image and emotional content and there's not language with it, then the stimulation of whether it's the creaky board or that dark alleyway or the light post that looks that certain way, then the brain responds as though that incident from the past is occurring right now. So the body will literally flush us with hormones to go into fight, flight, freeze response. Will dilate the pupils so that we can see. Will make the heart rate go up so that we can react. So the body goes into a trauma response, and the reptilian brain reacts, which is 300 times faster than the neocortex. So it's not something we can think through, it just happens. Yeah, it's part of our survival mechanism. But when when something is stuck, it's not been digested, that's when you get those reactions. And so part of working with trauma, of course, is to bridge image and felt sense with understanding and language, and to start to make those woven paths where that reaction doesn't happen. And that is possible.
Is it?
Yes, it is. And yoga is a great way to work with it, too.
Okay, you'll tell me about that in a moment. But I want to bring something else, because now we have a buzzword, a very common word, which is PTSD.
Right.
Post-traumatic stress disorder. What is the difference? Is there a difference, and what is the difference?
Well, trauma would be the experience. Post-traumatic stress disorder is when the system or the individual is unable to digest the trauma. So say someone has had a really strong life, they've had a lot of really powerful things, they have great community, they have a lot of good things going for them, and then they're in a car accident or they have a mugging. Then that person won't necessarily have PTSD if they're able to digest that experience and move through it and make sense of it. They're not going to necessarily have PTSD. So PTSD is specifically when the system is overwhelmed. So maybe someone has earlier experiences of trauma, maybe someone has been in a war zone, and that's just an overwhelming experience. So PTSD is when the trauma is so overwhelming that the body is not able, the mind, to digest it and make sense of it. And then it continues to live in a stuck way in the individual.
So, for example, the cases of sustained early abuse would compute for PTSD. Mm-hmm. Now, we'll continue with trauma, right?
Okay.
What are the current treatments for trauma?
Well, the exciting thing is there's a lot out there and there's a lot of research being done. So one of the early ones was called somatic experiencing, and that's Peter Levine. Peter Levine looked at really how the body takes in trauma and digests it, how we're similar and different than animals. So he looked at, a gazelle can't afford to have PTSD on the savannah, they're going to be down. So what do animals do? And so Peter Levine and somatic experiencing is a very body-based treatment that works with the nervous system. Before that, really some of the father of modern treatment is Bessel van der Kolk, who created this term PTSD. And his research is extensive about ways to work with trauma, and then he's also done a ton of work on yoga with trauma. And then there's Judith Herman's work that looked at how PTSD was similar to domestic violence cases. And then finally now there's a lot with EMDR. So EMDR works with the brain and with the left-right hemispheres to bring it together. And then there's other body-based systems that work after some of the somatic experiencing work. So Hakomi, Bill Bowen's work, a lot that bridges really body. Body has to be worked with in trauma.
Yes. Why?
because trauma is a lived experience in the body, it doesn't just happen in the mind, and that there's no way you can talk through. That early treatments with vets, they would try to talk through, but because the language system is shut down, and that the experience, it's such a primacy of physical experience. Neocortex shuts down, reptilian brain highlights up. We're pure in response to the moment. We have to work with the body. You simply can't heal trauma without the body.
Yeah, and we're all reaction.
Right.
Because
right.
the possibility of a response that usually involves the neocortex is shut down.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So you have to integrate the two, exactly.
How can yoga help? You were saying that yoga definitely helps. So how?
Right. Well, one of the really exciting things about modern yoga in its use in trauma is that it starts with the body. That so many people come to yoga now with the asana. And that asana itself is a powerful way to get people, one, in their body. If someone has multiple experiences of trauma, they're more dissociative. They just aren't tending to be in the body as much. So some of the work I would do with, say, abuse survivors from childhood is, can they actually be in their body? Can you sense your left foot and your right foot? Can you sense whether your quads are working? Are you pulling in equally on both feet? Simple things, but to actually get someone aware of their body is huge. So asana gives somatic awareness. It also gives a felt sense of strength. So at the core of a traumatic experience is overwhelm, helplessness, and disempowerment. And so asana gives us that empowerment, that strength, that potency. I mean, think of it. We've all had, trying to kick up to handstand 17,000 times, and one time you do. It's like, oh my God.
Or touching your toes, going forward. Yes,
right. And so there's this breakthrough and a sense of, I can do it. And if they have that, that is fundamentally a really affirming experience to have. So for someone with trauma, it's very healing. So asana helps with somatic awareness, with potency.
Just as we are discussing the different aspects, but doesn't the heightened physical awareness put in the body sometimes exacerbate the symptoms of trauma?
Yes, really good point. This is why, as someone who's a survivor of trauma, you really should only work with someone who's trained. And there are very well-meaning yoga teachers out there who go for, oh, this person is an abuse survivor. Let me work with the hips to get the energy moving. Right, your eyes are bugging out because that's the worst thing you could possibly do. So as yoga teachers, we need to know about scope of practice, which is something in the therapy world. If you're not trained to work with trauma, you have no business working with it. And yes, you can cause more harm, even well-intentioned, more harm than really benefit. So there has to be what's called a gentle titration. So you would start with very gentle, slow sensing. And that as someone who works with trauma, then I'm always checking in with my clients. I observe what's happening. And there's ways you work with it very slowly and gently. And you don't really do, in psychology, we have what's called uncovering work and ego building work. Same thing, I think of it in yoga. So I can do uncovering work where I'm going to stimulate perhaps that intensity when the client is ready. And I can do structure work, building and strengthening. So I'm going to always preference strengthening for a long time with clients. I mean, I have a client I've worked with for 7-8 months, and all we've done the whole time is just get in your body, just being strong, just feeling safe, making it a safe space for her, for us to work together, making it
But you roll it out of your mouth. Oh, making a safe space. It's like, it sounds like, oh, but it's crucial.
Oh, yes.
It's crucial. This is so important.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go on. You were telling me that on the side of asana, this is the help that yoga can provide. What else can yoga do?
So yoga can do a ton through the asana, but then there's so many layers to yoga, right? So the prana practice, the breathing practice, can be helped to calm the nervous system. We can have people have a sense of really being calmed and grounded in their body, which maybe they've never had. The meditation practices support a quality of witnessing where we can move. I mean, it's delicate because if someone has a strong trauma imprint, they can be dissociative. So you want to teach the difference between dissociating and observing experience. So you would start with experience near, and then you might go towards a more witnessing consciousness. But just the ability to hold an awareness can be very powerful when there is stimulation, when there is agitation. Yeah. And then all of the awareness practices, and then the Manomaya and Vijnamaya, so working with mind, beginning to notice we're not our thoughts, we're not our stories, and then Anandamaya Kosha. There is nothing that has been damaged. No matter what has occurred in your life, there is no fundamental sense of self that has been harmed or is bad. And many people who have long-standing trauma are going to have a sense of shame or that they're somehow damaged goods in a way. And that the Anandamaya Kosha teaches us that's not so.
Well, because not only they're going to think that, but also sometimes the reactivity of the body does not allow them to perform socially in an appropriate way.
Exactly.
So sometimes it's not just, oh, I feel bad about myself because I'm traumatized. I can't actually be around people. So this is different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There can be pretty intense imprints.
Now, this other, in terms of the body, you've told us. In terms of the mind, a little bit more specifically, because the mind, the witnessing, this is what you were saying. Now, the last part then would be more the spirit, right?
Right.
That would be more where the spirit comes in.
Yeah. And yoga, one of the things that yoga teaches us is how life is good, life is beautiful. And that if we have had repeat traumas, there can be a sense of loss of faith in the world, loss of goodness in the world, and quite naturally. So I think there's a way that yoga helps us to regain ourself and our connection to ourself, and through that strengthen our belief in that goodness, or really our direct experience of our own goodness and ourself. And that's so powerfully healing. It's like it gives you back to yourself. Yeah.
Now, I would imagine that this roadmap or protocol that you are sharing with us, I would imagine that in that context, this part comes last, or not. Is that right? How does that work? Is it a linear process? Are you better off addressing the body first and then talking about spirit, or do you have some times when you could actually start by spirit?
I think it depends on the person, because everyone's so unique. It really depends on the person and what they're bringing forth. In general, I find the body easiest to start because we can sense the sensation so directly. We all know when our back hurts, and then we know when it stops hurting. So somatic sensation is usually the most direct, but it would depend on the person. And really, it's not a linear path, right? Yoga is such a winding circle. So it's all happening at once.
Yeah.
I mean, I sort of have a dream of an integrated trauma modality where you incorporate beauty along the way, that has to be there. Which is very, very hard, because trauma survivors or traumatized individuals don't tend to see the beauty. Exactly. They are sometimes hypervigilant, and they're not trusting that the world can come up with beauty. Absolutely. So this is why I was asking you, because I would imagine that if this is your opening sometimes with some of these people, then it can be like, what is she talking about? Oh yeah, that's why I would probably never start. That's why you would start with the body, which I can understand why, yeah. This concludes the first part of a two-part show where I'm interviewing Darcy Lyon. She is a certified Anusara Yoga teacher and has a master's degree in Expressive Arts Therapy from CIIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies. She has a vast personal experience in dance as well, and she sees private clients, teaches public classes, workshops, and trainings, bridging Eastern and Western understanding about psychological change and integrative wisdom. Her diverse background includes, as I said, dance, but also a master's in clinical psychology and 2 decades of studies in mindfulness-based practices and spirituality, practicing also at women's shelters, retreats, and eating disorder clinics.